Good evening. Tonight's chapter is chapter 3 on marketing research. If you think about it, this particular course is a research course. You're taking marketing management, which allows you to bring together everything you've learned during your career at the College of Business and Public Administration. What we need to do now is apply all of that knowledge to your proposed venture that forms your marketing plan. To do that effectively, you're going to have to use marketing research, both secondary and primary, not only to find the opportunities, but to find the best way to attract customers and move them through the sales funnel attached with your venture. So if we think about it, why do we use marketing research? Well, one is we want to use it to identify opportunities and threats. So to start with, we've had you do a SWOT analysis. And your SWOT analysis requires that you go out and do an environmental scan. You take a look at the different environments that you have to contend with. The consumer environment, the economic environment, the competitive environment, the legal environment, the technological environment. All of those things are important to you, but they also show you where the opportunities are for you to develop your proposed venture and the threats you're likely to face as those areas change. So that's number one. The second reason we do it is you do it as a risk assessment of future programs. Well, while you're doing your research into the opportunities and threats, you should be thinking about, okay, what do I want this venture to do? And a prime decision point on that is you want the venture that has the lowest possible risk, but offers the highest possible reward. So now what you need to do is use marketing research to kind of qualify the different opportunities you're looking at and determine which one is best for you and how do you want to spend that $1 million that you have on this venture. And the last reason we want to use marketing research is to monitor the program. So you'll notice in your business plan, monitors and controls are a big thing. Well, this allows you to set up the monitors to determine if your business plan is hitting the targets that you're setting, those milestones that you're setting in terms of how many people have to be aware at the top of the funnel to start them down that process. Of the people that are aware, how many people have to take the next action? Well, you want to measure each one of those as part of your monitor and control. Now, regardless of whether you're doing a monitor and control, you're doing an environmental scan, you're trying to figure out what the project is, or what the most lucrative project is, you go through the same process. And it all starts with the most important thing, problem definition. Now, in this case, your problem is you have to come up with a venture that's profitable. That's your problem. Now what you need to do is figure out what do you need to know to find out how profitable that venture is going to be. Well, you need to know things like the size of the market, who the competitors are, why consumers would choose you over the competitors. So you need to understand what consumers think about when they're making a purchase, where they see weaknesses in the existing competition, and how can you take advantage of that. You need to understand how often they buy. Do they tell friends? Do they use social media? All of these things come into your information needs. And once you have your information needs down, then what you need to do is set your objectives. So your objective could be, let's take something simple. How big is the market? Well, you need to know how many consumers are in the market. How frequently do they buy? How much do they spend at one time? All of that will give you a sense of the market size in your area. If it's an objective like awareness, well, what's the awareness level now? How do we measure it? Is it measured on an aided basis where we basically give them the answer and ask them if they know what it is? Or is it unaided? Do we want them to tell us without us giving them the answer? Then you have to determine what type of study do you want to do. Well, in this case, you're going to have to do a couple of them. One's a secondary study, internet search, go to the library. If you're talking about a physical location, you're going to have to talk to the city to find out what traffic patterns are like. And then you're also going to have to do a survey. You're going to have to go out and talk to, I know this is tough to believe, but you're actually going to have to talk to consumers that are going to use your product or service. And you should talk to about 30 of them if you can, and ask them, what do you do now? What do you like about what you're doing now? What do you dislike about what you're doing now? How important are each of the factors that you use in making a decision? Are you willing to switch? If you're willing to switch, how much are you willing to pay? Where do you expect to hear about a competing product? Where should I be located, or how should I deliver to you? All of those things come out in a survey-style research, and that requires that you use Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey. Then you come up with a test instrument. Well, we've already talked about that. It's going to be a survey. It's probably going to be a self-administered survey. Okay? But there are different test instruments out there. Then once you get the information, how are you going to analyze it? Well, I've said you should shoot for about 35. That gives you a student's T. So you're not going to be able to do a lot of quantitative analysis. So all the things that you learned in marketing research about ANOVA or correlation, those are tough to use on small data sets like that. But you should be able to draw some conclusions. So what kind of conclusions do you want to draw? And in the real world, you'd probably go and do more research. You may want to do some focus group research as part of this. Maybe that's what you want to do. How are you going to collect the data? My guess is if you use SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, it's going to be electronic. Okay? Your analysis, then your conclusions. Well, what kind of conclusions do you need to do things? Well, those all come out of the research you're doing. Okay? But let's start with the secondary data you need to look for. Well, first off, see if there's a trade association for the area you're interested in. Chances are there is. Go to their website. See what kind of information they have. Send them an email. Call them up. Ask them for some help. Most trade organizations are more than happy to help you out, and especially if you're a student, because they realize that as a student, if they treat you well, you're likely to come back to them later on. Okay? You might want to look at some internet discussion groups. Maybe there's an internet discussion group targeting your industry. Take a look at them. Government publications or government offices. If you're telling me you're going to locate a retail store at a certain location, then I want you to be able to tell me how many cars go by that location, how many pedestrians walk by that location. Well, all of that comes from the city government who collects that information, or the Economic Development Agency. Maybe you want to read some corporate reports. Go and take a look at reports that have been produced by Ernst & Young, Price Waterhouse, McKinsey. Go and see if Frost & Sullivan has got any free reports that you can tap into. You might want to call Frost & Sullivan or email them and ask them if they've got anything that you could access. Okay? You might want to visit the library. Go and talk to Holly over in the library. She's the business librarian, and she can help you find publications on your particular sector. But you need to have that solid secondary basis so you understand what's been researched, what you can get for free, and then where the holes are that you need to fill through your primary research. So start looking at that. Now, when it comes to primary research, you've got a couple of options. You could do a qualitative research study, and there's kind of two that I think you want to take a look at. One is you could do some executive interviews. You could pick 5, 6, 7 people that you want to talk to, go out and ask them very detailed questions. These interviews typically take about an hour. They're very in-depth. And you want to find somebody who represents an industry leader, an industry thought leader so that you're going to get a really good view about what's going on. Your second option is go and do a focus group. You should do 2 focus groups just to make sure your first one wasn't skewed. Find 8 or 10 people, get them together for coffee, throw out some questions. If you want to help putting together the discussion outline, send me an email. Happy to do it. Same thing with your interview questions. If you want help putting together interview questions, feel free to email me and I'll be happy to go through them with you. And maybe we can even set up a time to meet either on the phone or in person to discuss. Right? Then what you want to do is your primary research as a survey. So you want to go out and do a survey using SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics. Now, in this case, you're probably going to do kind of a laddering technique or a convenience sample. So the textbook talks about how to do random sample, weighted samples, all those things. What you're looking to do is find some people you think are potential consumers, send them the information. That's probably the quickest way to get your 30 responses. If you try like a random, you're probably looking at doing 300 or 400 in order to get 30, and given the time frame, I just don't think you have that kind of time. So do a convenience sample or what's called a laddering or a snowball. Find one person who answers it and then ask them for a friend's name. Get them to refer a friend to you because you often find friends are very similar in terms of their behavior. And that makes sense because they're probably part of the same reference group. Okay. You may want to look at experiments, although that's a little bit more difficult to do in the time frame you're looking at. But you could do an experiment where you try different size, maybe different pricing, those types of things. The textbook really covers that area in a lot of detail, and I'd recommend on the experiment side, take a look at the textbook and use that as kind of your guide. The big thing you want to do in this course is forecasting. Number one is, what's the market size? We've already talked about that. How many potential customers are there? How often do they buy? How much do they spend each time? You multiply, and the churn. How many of those drop off every year? Because either move away, they age out, whatever it is, you need to know those 4 pieces of information to come up with an overall market size. Then you've got to figure out how much can you capture. So you want to take a look at how many customers can you reach. You've got $1 million budget. Now you've got to figure out how you're going to use that to effectively get to the consumer. So you want to figure out how many consumers you can reach. That becomes how many people can you touch with a social media ad? How many people can your sales reps meet over a certain period of time? How many of those people, how many are going to move through your sales funnel? And then that gives you the number of people you're likely to get. If you're dealing in a bar or a restaurant type of thing or anything where you have a capacity constraint, you have to figure that in. So how many turns can you do? That comes into your constraint area. Okay. So now what you want to do is also factor in what do you think the competition's doing? How many sales are they getting? Now remember when we talked about overall sales, it's number of customers, number of purchases, dollar amount they spend, and the churn. Well, now you want to look at that, but you've got to factor in you're probably going into an existing market. So are you going to attract more customers in? Then those first 4 will work for you. But now you need to add a 5th one in. How can you attract customers from somebody else? Because that's much more expensive than the customer over here that you're pulling in as a green field. So now what you want to do is take a look at how those customers come in. Oh yeah, and there's one other thing. Who's your heavy user? Because we know from Pareto analysis that the top 20% of your customer base are responsible for 80% of your sales. So how do you start to factor in your user level? And then how do you hold on to those heavy users? How do you cut down on churn? That could be one of your objectives. is you want to cut down on the churn in your customer base. How do you measure that? So that starts to give you an idea about your sales. You compare that to what you know the industry is, and then what you're looking at is, based on that, is there enough room for you? If there is, keep going. If not, you're going to have to go back and do a recalculation and look at a different segment. So all of those things go into the sales piece. And your textbook covers off the potential sales index. It's got some basic calculations, brand development index, talks about if your category is better than your brand, the category sells better than the brand, those types of things. Take a look at those. Those are important, especially if you go into a CPG area, consumer packaged goods. So if you're selling cereals or alcohol or soft drinks, things like that. The next thing you want to do as part of your forecasting is put that to the test and start forecasting out your cost structure as well. So how can you get your costs in line? What's your cost of goods sold going to be like at your proposed volume? Well, that's going to require more research because now you're going to have to go out and start talking to suppliers. And by the way, in the appendix of your report, I'm looking to see all these people that you've contacted. So now you really see how important it is to calculate things out. Now there's two ways to forecast. I've kind of gone through what's called the bottom-up approach. You can also do a top-down approach where you come up with the total market size, and that might be based upon, you've got the US market, and then you say, okay, Grand Forks is X% of that market. Here's what the size of the Grand Forks market is. I think I can capture Y% of that. That's called a top-down approach. You should do both because that improves the accuracy of your number. Now, what you're going to find is when you do your first calculation, there's going to be a huge difference between those two numbers. But over time, they're going to get tighter and tighter as you collect more information and you understand the difference between the Grand Forks market, the national market, and your ability to get consumers in. This is the one course where there's really no one answer. The market's going to be a range of sizes. I'm relying on your judgment based upon all this research to say, okay, the market goes, my estimates are the market's between this and this. I'm thinking, though, that the market is more likely this, and here's why. And you explain that out in the body of your paper so that I can follow your logic. In your marketing plan, it's your logic I'm interested in, much more so than the numbers themselves. So how did you get to it? Okay, so if you do all that, you'll have produced a great forecast of your market size and your sales potential. You'll have also used marketing research effectively to identify the opportunity, to figure out the best way to approach consumers, and the best way to monitor how your plan is going so you know if there's a problem in the shortest period of time so you can repair it quickly and at the lowest cost possible. Best of luck with your marketing research. I'll talk to you later when we get to the next chapter.